seat belts. I like it. I don't think I heard you mention it, but these are turbo diesels, is that?
They're twin turbos in each
Yeah,
one.
oh, twin turbos in each one.
Jet drives.
Wow.
Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, it has too high of a sulfur content. So they bring the low sulfur coal by rail from Wyoming to St. Louis, put it on barges, they bring it up to the power plants by barge. This plant also uses river water. It pulls in water from the Ohio River, it filters it, sends it through the plant to generate steam, and then it sends it to that barrel-shaped cooling tower, cools that water down, and reuses it over and over again. Several years ago, one of the maintenance workers at this plant rode with us. He told us that cooling tower is 750 feet tall. It's 75 stories. And if you see the flashing lights up on the top, he said from time to time they have to be serviced. And the only way to get up there to do that is a ladder. It's on the back side. You can see a little bit of that ladder from here. He said none of the maintenance workers at that plant like to climb that ladder. And they do rock, scissors, paper to see who the unlucky one is that gets to go to the top. He said it takes about an hour from the time you start until you get to the top. And he said just about the time you start getting tired, you get to the point where that tower starts leaning out. If you look at that tower, I'll turn so you can see a little better. Just above the waist level, and then just before you get to the top, there's two platforms. That's the only two places that they can get off and sit down and rest off of that ladder. He said as bad as it is going up, it is far worse coming down. He said at least when you're going up, you can look up most of the time, but occasionally when you're coming down, you have to look down 750 feet. So it's a bad day when these guys show up to work and the boss says, get up there and work on those lights. This is the little town of Bethlehem, Indiana. Bethlehem was founded by a Colonel Armstrong. He was a Revolutionary War officer. He was given a land grant as compensation for his service in the American Revolution. He came here to check out his land, decided it was a pretty nice place for a town. He was from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, so he named this after his hometown. Until the Civil War, Bethlehem, Indiana was a thriving community. Had a shipyard that made steamboats, an iron foundry, numerous factories, sawmill. And then during the Civil War, all of the young men from Bethlehem decided to join the army at the same time. The town had a big festival. The young men marched off. They all joined the same regiment. that regiment suffered 75% casualties in the Battle of Atlanta, and it broke the heart of this little town. Bethlehem was never the same after that. There were no young men to come take over the farms and the factories. The town fell apart. Final straw for Bethlehem, 1937, the largest flood ever recorded on the Ohio River. It flooded out that town to a depth of about 1987 by a man named John Howard. He was a military officer who had served with Colonel George Washington in the French and Indian Wars. His family was from Norfolk, England, so he named this plantation the Norfolk Farms. 1787, when this was established, this was not yet the state of Kentucky. That didn't happen until 1792. 1787, this was still part of the state of Virginia, and the deed to this land was signed by the governor of Virginia at the time, who was Patrick Henry. It was a very successful plantation. It raised predominantly peaches and tobacco, passed down through the family until 1850. His granddaughter inherited it. Her name was Mary Wycliffe. First thing she did when she took possession of this plantation, she spent $5,000 and she planted 10 acres of roses. She got married a year later. She married a man named John Preston, and they changed the name of it to the Preston Plantation, and it's been known as the Preston Plantation ever since. They operated this plantation with 66 slaves, and in 1858, the adjacent piece of property was purchased by a lady named Delia Webster. She was from Vermont. She was a staunch abolitionist. She became very good friends with Mary. She convinced Mary that owning slaves were wrong. So in 1858, Mary freed all 66 of those slaves, offered to hire them back as employees, and only one of the former slaves chose to leave the plantation. And then this became one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. They would shelter the runaway slaves on the plantation during the day. At night, they would put them in a boat, get them across to the Indiana side, and there were 28 safe houses between here and the Canadian border. Because just because they made it to Indiana didn't mean they were safe. The posses from Kentucky could pursue them all the way to the Canadian border. That house you saw back there, Mary built that in 1861. She called it the Freedom House, and it was where the runaway slaves would take sanctuary while they were on the plantation. Mary had one child, and unfortunately that son died at the age of 4. Her husband died in 1890. She lived 8 additional years. She died in 1898. She had no children to leave this plantation to. She was a very devout Catholic, so she willed this plantation to the Archdiocese in Louisville, and she wanted it turned into a Catholic school. Well, she had 22 distant relatives that were not happy about that. They went to court and they fought that will. They got it overturned, and then those 22 relatives fought so much amongst themselves over this plantation that in 1902, the judge that was overseeing the case got so disgusted with them, he ordered this plantation cut into 22 parcels and sold at auction. And then that was the end of the Preston Plantation, unfortunately. But I always wonder, if you wander through the 8,000 acres that made up this plantation, if there would be an abundance of wild roses left over from that 10 acres that she planted when she took possession of it. So pirates moved over here to the Indiana side, and they would try to lure these sailors off of these steamboats with the promise of free wine. They would throw a big party, they would get them drunk, hit them on the head, throw them into the river, and they would come out and they would plunder and burn these river boats. This area became known as Dead Man's Pool for the number of dead bodies that floated down this part of the Ohio River. In the 1920s, the farmer that owned this field was plowing. His plow hit an earthenware jar full of gold coins. They think it's some of the plunder from the river boats. 10 years later, in the 1930s, farmer at the other end of the field, he was digging a foundation for a new chicken house, and he uncovered a metal box full of emeralds and rubies, and they think that was some of the plunder from the river boats as well. It was enough that he built a much bigger chicken house and built a house for himself as well. The piracy here lasted until the little town of Milton, Kentucky, which is right across the river from Madison. They built a wing dam, came 3/4 of the way across this river. That wing dam made it easy for steamboats to come into Milton. It changed the flow of this river just enough so that over time it eroded this island, and then with the island gone, steamboats didn't stop here any longer to put these pirates out of business. But at one time, if you wanted some free wine, this was a pretty dangerous place to get it right here. So, cool question?
What was the artist's name?
Harlan Hubbard. Harlan Hubbard. That's it. Speaking of pirates, do you know how much a pirate pays to get his ears pierced? A buccaneer. Fishermen like that warm discharge water. They come and they catch some really large fish in there. Several years ago, fishermen thought he caught the world record bluegill here. This fish was about this big. He took it to the paper thinking he might become famous, and they identified it as a variety of a piranha. They think somebody had it in an aquarium till it got large enough they couldn't care for it. They dumped it in the river. It went to that warm discharge water that's warm year round. That piranha just kept getting bigger and bigger. That fisherman was from Kentucky. He said, I'll probably never get a chance to eat another one. He took it home and had it for dinner. He said it was very good. So I don't know of any Kentuckian that's ever been eaten by a piranha. But I know one piranha that's been eaten by a Kentuckian. So you figure out who the most dangerous is there. If you take a look at the stacks, they are 900 feet tall. The flashing lights on those need serviced as well. Maintenance workers at this plant, they get an elevator inside that will take them all the way to the very top. One of the maintenance workers here, she told us 900 feet up, and it's a wonderful view if you're brave enough to open your eyes.
Mallory ate piranha.
Mm-hmm. I remember you said that.
Oh, didn't want to spoil his story.
Yeah.
She said it was good.
Do you have any questions for me about anything we saw today?
Barge all going downriver.
Yes, so that's a really interesting thing. When we first started this business 11 years ago, we saw barges of coal going that way, barges of coal coming this way. Why don't they just leave that coal up that way and that coal down that way? The coal that's coming down here is coming from Kentucky and West Virginia and Pennsylvania, high sulfur coal. They take it down, they put it on ships, and they send it overseas, and they burn it in their power plants. Coal coming upriver, that's all that Wyoming coal coming out of the Powder River Basin, out of Wyoming, the low sulfur coal, and that's what we burn along here. Good question.
How much fuel will you use?
So, I've been cruising. I've been a little faster today because it's a little hotter. I try to make as much breeze as I can. I've been cruising about 34 miles an hour. At 34 miles an hour, you get about 1.5 miles a gallon. The boat will do about 55. If I do 55, the boat gets about 2/3 of a mile a gallon. So I try never to do that. So yeah. Another question?
How many bridges
Oh gosh.
do you know between Indiana and Kentucky?
Oh, between
Just-
Indiana and Kentucky, that's pretty easy. So, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Counting the dam at Markland, we'll count that as a bridge because you can drive across as 7. About 7 or 8.
Okay, and do they have any, like, the little cart ferries?
They do. Up in just by the Cincinnati, just above Cincinnati. In fact, I think it's one of the oldest businesses in Ohio. It's the ferry service called the Boone Ferry. Google it, and it's a really interesting way to take them across. There's also a newer one at Rising Sun that will take you across to Rabbit Hash, and they just opened that one the last couple of years. You catch it by the casino there, and they'll ferry you across to Rabbit Hash, Kentucky. And if you haven't been to Rabbit Hash, Kentucky, millions of people have never been to Rabbit Hash, Kentucky. So not too far from here in Kentucky, a family lost their farm in a land dispute. And the father packed this family up. He moved them to Indiana. His family had a teenage son that liked to fish. One night that young boy was in his John boat fishing on the river. Two men came running up to him. They said, "We missed our steamboat. We'll pay you a silver dollar if you'll row us out to catch it." This young boy thought he would do a good deed. He put those men in his boat, rowed them out, got his silver dollar, went back to fishing. I thought nothing more of it. 2 weeks later, the state of Kentucky charged this boy with operating a ferry without a permit. He got a court date. He studied up as best he could. He went to see the judge. The judge said, "How do you plead?" The boy said, "Not guilty." The judge said, "On what basis?" The boy said, "Your Honor, I could not have been operating a ferry. A ferry takes people from one side of the river to the other. I took those men from one side to the middle." The judge thought for a moment and said, "I have to agree. Case dismissed." The judge was so impressed with this young boy that judge took him under his wing. He loaned him law books, encouraged that boy to study and become an attorney, and he did. He became a very famous attorney. He also became our 16th president. That boy was Abraham Lincoln. So you stop to think, if he had not been out there that night fishing, if those men had not missed their steamboat, if he had not been charged with operating a ferry, he may have never become an attorney, and we would not know the name Abraham Lincoln today. Hope you had a good time out here. I'm gonna take
definitely don't more than 55.
Yeah. And he probably doesn't get a mile a gallon.
No. I like to see, wait and watch that guy come screaming down the river. I would love that.
Keep an eye on him. He's about sunk that thing about 3 times.
Really?
So.
It sounds pretty healthy. Come on, camera, what the hell? He's just warming that bad boy up.
Your hair always looks fine.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Looks like that.
How much ones you got?
So while Nick is tying us up back there, thank you guys so much for riding with us today. Our History Center in Madison has a diary from a man who moved here from Vermont in 1820. This man wrote in his diary that for a month before he left Vermont, people from all around the area came to him. He said some he didn't even know, and they said, "Don't move to Madison, Indiana." They said it has terrible weather, it has panthers, it has poison snakes, and worst of all, it has Kentuckians, who every one of them has killed somebody by the time they're 20. So other than the fact that we don't have panthers anymore, I don't know if anything's changed since 1820. Thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your time in Madison.